Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast with your host, Andrew Langer.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Lunch Hour with Federal Newswire Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Langer. Joining me today is a dear friend of mine. This is the great privilege of hosting this show, is that occasionally I can have on good friends. Her name is Kerri Toloczko, and I'm going to read this because it's a mouthful. Kerri is the National Networks Director for the Election Integrity Network, which is a project of the Conservative Partnership Institute. She's also a senior advisor to the Florida Fair Elections Coalition, and she runs a conservative coalition meeting on the west coast of Florida, which is where she now lives. But you are coming to us from Jackson Hole, Wyoming. You're out there at a coalition meeting, which is just wonderful. Kerri, let's start here. Talk about the work that the Election Integrity Network does. You've been crisscrossing the country for a couple of years now, and explain to us why.
Because if we don't get election integrity right, all is lost. We don't get anything else. We don't get school choice. We don't get tax reform. We don't get rid of the regulations. We get nothing unless votes are counted accurately and fairly. So that is why we do this. That's part A. Part B is it's the right thing to do. For us at Election Integrity Network, we don't care how somebody votes. We just want to make sure that that vote is counted accurately. I will be frank. There is one side that does not support election integrity ideologically, and there is one side that does. So it's a constant battle. The left is always coming up with great ways to change the process because that's their plan. They figured out at some point that they could invest in the election process and change outcomes, as opposed to getting into campaigns and elections. And they do it through nonprofits. It's a long story. But basically at Election Integrity Network, we're a platform. So we provide resources, opportunities, and networking opportunities and coalitions for people, just grassroots folks all over the country to come together and help in this, making sure that everybody's vote is accurately counted.
Well, actually, there's a mutual friend of ours that used to say, and still says, that elections are about winning. You know, the political process, elections is about winning. Otherwise, it's just civics. Now, there's a civics aspect to this in the end, but we know this. We know that there is one side that is interested in making sure that we do things according to a regular order. And then there's another side that just wants to sort of expand the universe of votes and get rid of anything that makes sure that a vote is actually connected to the person making that vote. You know, the same folks who want to lower the voting age to 16 for people who lower the voting age to 16, but keep those 16-year-olds on their parents' insurance until they're 26. All of these things are the same folks who want to expand the Supreme Court because they can't get a fair shake, or they feel like they can't get a fair shake out of the 9 justices on the court. All of these things are interrelated, aren't they?
They are, absolutely. The left is very process-oriented. We look at freedom and liberty. Yeah. We look at individuality. We look at how does an individual make an individual choice without anybody bothering him or her. We look at entrepreneurship. Let's leave the entrepreneurs alone, please. The left is always trying to control the outcome by the process. And Andrew, you're absolutely right. It doesn't matter what the topic is. Their strategy is the same. And in the election integrity sphere, they are funded by multi-billionaires who apparently have guilt about being successful instead of celebrating it and want to control those outcomes because, to your point, the outcome of elections changes everything. We just had a governor who pardoned a bunch of people on death row. That is a voting problem. Yeah. We have a president who doesn't know what he's doing all day long, which is very sad. I find no joy in saying that whatsoever. Yes. That is a voting problem. We have drag queens doing all kinds of things in grammar schools. That is a voting problem. And so the left has identified that absolutely everything that happens in this country is a voting issue. And therefore, that's where they're going.
See, it's interesting because I'm gonna take it a step further, and I'm gonna say that it's not just that you have billionaires who feel guilty, but you have billionaires who believe, and I think rightly so, that if they get the right people elected, they will make many, many more billions on this. You know, I think about Tom Steyer. I'm gonna name names here. Tom Steyer, who before Sam Bankman-Fried, we could talk about Sam Bankman-Fried as well, the cryptocurrency billionaire. But Tom Steyer at one point was among, if not the most, the largest donor to Democrat candidates, among the top. At one point, I think it was the 2014 election cycle, he spent $50 million of his own money in getting Democrats elected. He didn't do this because he felt guilty. He did this because he knew he can make $250 million in getting money essentially transferred out of the public treasury in the form of subsidies and other things for green energy, right? All of this is the same. Sam Bankman-Fried giving millions of dollars to Democrats and to some Republicans because he knew that it would help protect his allegedly fraudulent cryptocurrency exchange and the investments that he was doing on the other side. Right. I mean, this is a real problem, right? Is the kleptocracy. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I would say I agree with you 100%. It's the hypocrisy that kills me.
Yeah.
So I would say the metaphor to encapsulate everything you just said is the political and the Hollywood left on climate change. You people need to get rid of your cars, and I'm going to fly to Europe.
You people
in my private plane. On my large yacht, I'm going to water my enormous yard. So, you know what? Andrew, I think you and I have talked about Ed Begley Jr. before. Ed Begley Jr. is sort of a minor Hollywood guy. He basically drives around in a Flintstone car and talks about climate change and green everything, grows his own stuff. I love the guy.
Yeah.
He's a total leftist, and I love the guy because he is true to what he says. If it comes out of the mouth of a leftist, it's hypocrisy or it's just a lie. It's just, and the reason I appreciate people like you doing shows like this is that people need to understand what they never hear about through the mainstream media. It is so important.
It's interesting because I had this conversation with our mutual friend, my good buddy, Jerry Rogers, now the editor of Real Clear Policy. And there is the issue of hypocrisy and consistency, right? I think we have to be consistent. I think this is a trait that is much more important to conservatives and folks on the center right. I'll include our libertarian friends in this, though they can sometimes be a little good for nothing. But that consistency of application of philosophy, this is of vital importance, isn't it?
It absolutely is. I try to figure this out all the time. I should probably stop because it's like taking a brick to your forehead. But if you believe in something, as conservatives, we believe in things. And we're not perfect, and I'm not saying we're perfect, but we believe in things, and we not only guide our professional life for those of us in the public policy arena, and of course I'm including you in that, but in our personal lives, we really strive to apply those principles. And if we say the sky is blue in our professional life, we agree that the sky is blue in our personal life. It seems like the left is completely bereft of any kind of principles. It's always the end justifies the means, and they don't care who they hurt. They don't care what city they destroy, as long as they stay in power. And it seems like this fundamental difference is power for us. And it's funny, we were just talking about this I was just talking with some friends here at Jackson Hole, all conservatives, that we in the public policy field are never going to be millionaires striving after the freedom and liberty for other people. Yet the left, it's all about themselves. It's like so fundamental, it's almost hard to kind of wrap your arms around it until you look at the political and the policy behavior and the differences between the two.
Let's go back to something we talked about a little bit at the beginning of the interview. And it gets into something I talked about with Congresswoman Mary Miller a few weeks back, maybe a few months back. And it was the collapse of objective truth.
Yeah.
Right? We no longer, the left tells us to follow the science, except when the science doesn't work in their favor. Right? It's the issue of the Sam Brinton story. Not that this gets us very far afield from the election integrity issue, when we're going to come back to this in a second. But the idea that we can't look at Sam Brinton and say, there's something really wrong here. Yes. This person should not hold a sensitive post in at the Department of Energy. But we can't say that anymore. You know, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, you know, having all of these weird hypotheticals, you know, on the high court, you know, as a sort of doing this weird mental gymnastics, but at the same time saying, well, I can't define what a woman is because I'm not a biologist. I mean, there is a real danger for society, civilization, if we no longer have objective truth, right?
Right. And so the problem, and I would argue that Sam Brinton is also a voting problem. If
yes,
yeah,
100%.
Okay,
good point.
So, and the poor man needs help. I mean,
hold on.
Sad.
For those of you, hold on. For those of you who don't know, I mean, Kerri is a consummate professional here. And what she did just then was she's like, all right, Andrew's getting far afield. Let's bring it back. You were saying voting problem.
It's a voting problem, but
I get what you're doing. I saw what you did there.
Yeah, you saw what I did there. But but there's the same circle of what you're talking about, objective truth. And so here's what happens. The left takes out of the Saul Alinsky playbook, let's accuse them of everything bad and nasty when they do something that is morally right. So if we complain about Sam Brinton being a true national security problem and a gentleman that needs some help, we're mean to gay people. We all hate the gays. Could not be further from the truth. Same thing with election stuff. Every time we try to harden some kind of election laws to protect everyone of either party and any skin color, we're suppressionists, we're racist, we don't want poor people to vote. And people who do not have the opportunity to hear the truth, and again, that's the problem with the media, people who don't have the opportunity to hear the truth believe those lies about us and create the voting bloc that the left is intentionally creating by calling us those names.
Yeah, and it's fundamentally about power. You're absolutely correct there. You know, we come back to these issues of trying to ascribe malice, right, to our side in terms of what we do. At the same time, actively denying things like, despite Georgia passing their voter integrity law, their election integrity law, having more people than ever voting, and
more minorities
it is amazing
than ever
cognitive
voting.
Right. More minorities than ever, and you have Raphael Warnock getting out there and saying, "Well, yeah, we have more people vote, but that doesn't mean that voter suppression doesn't happen." It's well, no, that's not the way this works. But talk a little bit. Talk about that and how insane that perspective actually is. And I'm not calling Raphael Warnock insane. I'm being very careful here. But the perspective is a crazy one.
This perspective is crazy. So in case anybody doesn't know, Raphael Warnock is a black guy. So you have this huge number of African Americans going to the polls for the very first time. How awesome is that? And he's not jumping up and down celebrating that? That's crazy. I mean, that just kind of shows how completely skewed the whole thing is. And Andrew, let's talk about, so I dive into polling a lot in my election integrity work.
Yeah.
So I know what people actually think versus what the left is telling people to think or telling the rest of us what to think. Yes. So you look at stuff like a lot of our friends at think tanks have done a lot of polling, especially in minority communities, about things like, do you think voter ID is voter suppression? Minorities overwhelmingly say no, it's not suppression. Right. Overwhelmingly by like 70 and 80%, which in polling world is everybody, right? Do you think it's okay to, have an ID along with your absentee ballot so that we know you're really the one? 100% of minorities, practically 90% think it's great. 90% of minorities want to harden election laws. When you look at polling and you look at what real people really think, it is completely different from the narrative because it's not convenient to the left for African American or Hispanic or Asian or whatever minority group it is to be supportive of election integrity and understand why it matters, no matter what their voting behavior is.
I want to come back to the specifics as to what the Election Integrity Network is doing, but I want to pull it back a little bit more and talk about your career. You came to Washington. I won't say how long ago you came to Washington. You and I have known each other pretty much my entire public policy career,
Yeah.
which is crazy because you're younger than I am.
But thank you for that.
But what brought you to Washington? I don't think you and I have ever had this conversation. I don't know what brought you to Washington and got you involved in politics and public policy.
Well, so the short answer is God, because he always like makes those crazy steps that you're saying, why am I doing this? What is happening here? So years and years ago, I lived in Dallas. It was 1999, and I was publishing a business magazine, and it was author driven. And so I would go around to famous people in Dallas and write articles about how to run my business, blah, blah, blah. And one of the persons I met was the CEO of a think tank. And I knew I was a conservative. Yeah, I was a Boston Irish Catholic, not a Democrat, which was weird in my family. And he invited me to come work for him doing marketing. And I loved the marketing, which was like booking people like me on shows like yours. And then I loved the policy. So I said to a friend who worked there, who Merrill Matthews, I said, I want to be a policy analyst. How do you do that? And he said, you read a lot of stuff and you plagiarize everybody else's stuff from all the think tanks, and they all like you to do that. And that's what started me. So I went from Dallas and then moved to DC during the Bush years as a consultant to the Bush administration, and also working for think tanks there. And so, it's just kind of been a wander. And then I moved to Florida 2 years ago thinking I was retiring. And then I talked to Cleta Mitchell, who is our chair at Election Integrity. And so now I work like 60 hours a week in retirement.
It's funny. I was joking. Is that you and I really have known each other my entire political and public policy career, like in all the things that I've done. I moved back to DC in 99, and we got to know each other then. For those of you who don't know, I'm gonna brag a little bit about Kerri, or throw down a little bit of truth here. I would not be doing a lot of what I do had it not been for Kerri. I was working for a trade association. And was sort of casting about for what I wanted to do next. And Kerri said, hey, there's this organization and they're looking for somebody to take it over. The chairman of the organization, the founder of it, is moving on. The two of you should talk. And so I would not be doing work with Institute for Liberty had it not been for Kerri bridging that gap there. So I'm always grateful to you.
Well, that was a good move on my part. I think I said something along the lines of, Andrew, would you like a think tank?
Yes, that's pretty much what you said. I mean, I joke about it and say that I won it in a card game. But if you didn't know Jason Wright, the original founder of Institute for Liberty, you wouldn't know Jason doesn't play cards. So So that's part of the joke there. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about the issues of. Well, let's talk first of all about the structural deficit that conservatives find themselves in vis-a-vis election integrity. The things that were done in the wake of COVID-19 that have put conservatives behind the eight ball when it comes to electoral politics. Let's expand on the problem and what we're facing.
Yeah. So good news, bad news. You and I are 10th Amendment people. We're big believers in federalism, but it doesn't come sometimes without its, let's say, issues. So states are able and should be able. They have the right to determine their own election processes. So when you're swatting at the election integrity fly, you're swatting at 50 flies plus DC. So there's a little bit of a challenge. So different states have different laws. In Florida, where I live, we're not perfect, but we have really solid laws. Thank you, Governor DeSantis. In Virginia, for example, is a nightmare. So what we do at Election Integrity Network, we have worked with local task forces, and now in 17 states, we have statewide task forces. They are robust, they are active, they've done a lot of great work. It's not a bunch of people sitting around kvetching about how terrible election integrity it is. It's people doing solid work. For example, in Florida, we have an elections crime bureau. And through our Florida Fair Elections Coalition, we have brought two, and we're in the process of bringing a third crime case to the Crime Bureau.
Okay.
Because we have a coalition, and we have a coalition call every week, which is, again, very intense. And people on the call said, oh, this happened, and now it's being investigated at the criminal level. So we have them in 18 states. Anyone who's listening to this, we should probably give my email at the end. Please contact me if you are interested at all in becoming part of the election integrity infrastructure in your state. Don't let the word scare you. You don't have to know anything other than something's wrong in my state and I really want to see what I could do to help. We have the training, we have the resources, we have the personnel to help people. And because we don't have billionaires like Zuckerberg and Soros and Pierre Omidyar of eBay, we have to do this as patriots. We have to do this as volunteers. And in most states that have had very robust election integrity calls and coalitions, we have more than tripled the number of poll observers that we have in those states.
Wow.
And it's made a huge difference. And of course, the government bureaucrats are complaining. In Florida, we had 17 times more signatures questioned on our absentee ballots. Oh, isn't that terrible? Because all these crazy conservatives sent all these poll observers in to say, no, that does not match. So, it's
God forbid, right? And it's so funny. Had a conversation with David Stockman, and one of the things that David Stockman and I were talking about was the disconnect between the valuations of the stock market and the valuations of American GDP. That the stock market's value grew, I don't know. I don't remember what David Stockman said, but let's say it grew 20 times, while at the same time GDP in America grew only 5 times. And so it was overvalued, and what it means is the stock market really isn't worth what they're saying that it is. My point in this is when you change election law and you make it easier for cheating to happen, right?
Yes.
Then you have to expect that there are going to be more challenges that occur. If you have vastly expand what had been a very limited absentee ballot process, and all of a sudden, let me ask you this, Kerri, how many more times, between absentee ballots and mail-in voting, is it an order of magnitude? Is it multiple orders of magnitude? Are we up, is it 4 times, 5 times, 10 times as many people voting by mail now as voted by absentee ballot?
I don't know. I don't know the numerical answer, but the short answer is yes. What you just said, orders of magnitude. Some states, which is a nightmare, send out universal ballots. You don't even have to ask. So all those stupid excuses over COVID, which were just nonsense to begin with, and we can get into Zuckbucks and how Mark Zuckerberg influenced all of this. But it used to be, rationally, I'm going to be out of the country. I'm going to be on vacation. I'm going to be somewhere else. I would like to vote by absentee. Absolutely fabulous. Thank you very much. We'll send you an absentee ballot. Now there's no excuse absentee. Yes. And in many states like Florida, you have a signature verification. So you literally have tens and in Florida, we had over 2 million absentee ballots. I'm just using, and again, we have good luck.
That's my point.
So does anyone listening to us think that any number of poll observers can look at 2.3 million signatures and verify them all? Especially when you have the Democrat observer next to you saying, oh yeah, that matched. That came from that nursing home where we sent in 25 ballots. Yeah, that matches. Sure. It's a nightmare. It's a subjective assessment.
And it gets into the issue, right, of the narrative that gets formed, right? Because they so overwhelm the ballot box and there are so few resources to verify. So fraud becomes very difficult to prove. And because we don't have the resources to prove the fraud, therefore the fraud doesn't exist.
Yeah, so a couple of points on that. One, you're exactly right. There's the knowable and there's the provable. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So I know something happened here versus I can go to a courtroom and prove it. They're two very different things, which doesn't mean that A is not absolutely correct. And also, just to be really clear, there's outright fraud and there is outright fraud. And then there's election officials who don't adhere to laws. We saw this in Maricopa County.
Yes.
Just throw the ballots that aren't going through the machine in the bag with the ballots that have already gone through the machine, and then we'll count them all later. That was a process problem. It blows my mind. That was a process problem. There are probably thousands and thousands of ballots in Maricopa County that were never counted. I don't know whether they were Democrat ballots or Republican ballots. Nobody knows. So again, just to reiterate, you have the fraud problem, and then you have the incompetence problem. And it is also not always malicious incompetence. And that's one of the things that why we promote poll observing so hard at Election Integrity Network, because these people are seeing what happens and often can say, they have a piece of paper and they go, here's this statute. You just didn't comply with it. Can I help you with that? I want to be, we tell our people, you are a resource. You are not a mosquito.
Yes.
Buzzing around someone's ear. You're a resource.
I am a firm believer in something called Hanlon's razor. It was also some people call it Heinlein's razor because it was also offered by Robert Heinlein, the author. Never attribute to malice that which can just as easily be attributed to stupidity.
Oh, that's so true.
And I find that yes, and there's and one of the problems we have, and I'm going to pull this out more generally. We're going to come back to elections in a second, Kerri. But one of the problems that I have is we have stupidity or incompetence coupled with laziness.
Yes.
Right.
Oh,
and people
yes,
not
absolutely.
wanting to ask the tough questions. Talk about that.
Yeah, that absolutely happens. So one of the things that we train people to do and encourage people to do is to go make a relationship with your election official and their staff. And the reason we do that is we want them to be able to gently say, this is a problem, this is not a problem, and to recognize things. And I tell people, even if you don't like your election official, if you hate your election official, if your election official is a leftist, it's still the only one you have. So you have to forge that relationship. Right. And you can't be accusatory. You have to be helpful. We had Fairfax County, Virginia, had a really grossly incompetent election registrar, I think they're called in Fairfax. And our team, our Fairfax Fair Elections team went in there and said, this is wrong, that is wrong, this is wrong, you're doing all these things wrong, you're not checking the social security numbers on the absentee ballots, are you kidding me? To which the person said, well, we don't care, we're not doing it, which is a violation of Virginia law. They hated each other.
Wow.
Our people still worked with them. He got fired because of his incompetence, was made known by our team. And now they have a new registrar who I'm sure is still very much a liberal that has opened the door to this team because they were professional, they did it properly. And again, we have to do everything at the ground level. I can't stress that enough. The billionaires do it up here. We have to do it down there.
And that's where the training comes in. You have been in, how many states have you gone to do this training, Kerri?
All of them. So we did summits last year, and we did 9 in-person enormous summits in the 9 states that we all know are about, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Florida.
Sure.
Right. Can't do them in all 50. Would love to. Our coalitions now are in 17 or 18, and we plan to have all 50 states by the end of this year. That is absolutely our goal. And people come to us. They email me and my staff and say, oh my gosh, we heard about this. We want to be part of it. So our training is national. So in addition to doing the statewide coalition calls, we have national coalition calls. Some of them are training, and some of them are working groups. So anyone who's interested in, say, vulnerable voters or data or machines, clean up voter rolls, we have a group for you. We have a national group as well as the state groups. So we are able to train anyone who finds us or we find. Now, still, the actual training and certification, and I think almost every state has to go through a party, right? You have to still do the training. But we have sort of what we call supplementary training. We have master classes online that are only about 4 or 5 minutes long that tell people all the different aspects. So we recognize that people really want to be engaged, but they need help. They've never done this before.
Right. And I totally get that. So let's. It's funny. I had a question in mind, and then it popped right out of my head.
Oh, welcome to my life.
Yes. So. This is where I wanted to go. So while we're recording this, there is a race for a chairman of the Republican National Committee. And at this point in time, there are 2 candidates, Harmeet Dillon, who's from California, Ronald Romney McDaniel, who's the current RNC chair. one of the criticisms of the RNC is that the RNC and state Republican parties have been extraordinarily bad. They've been behind the eight ball on this issue of mail-in balloting and early voting. How do you see this playing into this? What do Republicans need to be doing better? And I mean, we could glibly say all of it, but let's talk with some specifics about what Republicans ought to be doing better, as they decide whether or not to pick new leadership or not.
Okay, so I'm going to say three things. So remind me, Andrew, if I only get to two, and I'm fine.
Okay.
So,
yes,
super
we will not treat you like the
1980 something, and this is a super short story, but it's important. 1980 something, the Republicans in New Jersey behaved very badly in an election. They got sued by the Democrats, and whoever was the chairman of the party then, I don't remember who it was, signed a decree, a consent decree that was issued by a judge in New Jersey saying that Republicans shall henceforth nationwide, not in New Jersey, enter into any election integrity activity. So go forward 20 years, the liberal judge who kept re-upping this consent decree every year died. The new judge looked at it and said, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen, and didn't sign it. So all of a sudden, and I'm not 100% with this 2017 or 2018, but in that time period, the RNC realized it could engage in election integrity activity, not just campaign stuff. So they hired a wonderful human being named Josh Finley to run the Election Integrity Bureau. And over the last year, he has been amazing. And they have appointed a lot of election integrity directors in the states, the critical states. And most of them have done a fantastic job. That said, the building, as we know it, is not necessarily a big fan of election integrity. So our thing is, all you nice Republicans can play with us or see ya. We'd love to have you join us, but we're moving on anyway, with or without you. We are doing this from the grassroots level. So we have the support. They can do things they could never do before, but I think they're on the learning curve of what does this look like? And Josh Finley, again, is just wonderful. And I think he's educating inside the building as much as he's educating outside the building. So that's a new thing. As far as the race goes, I don't know, and I don't care. It doesn't matter.
No. And I don't need you to comment on the race, but really, it's become an issue. I mean, Republicans. Let me ask you this. I mean, do you see things like comprehensive automatic mail-in balloting? Do you see that going away? I mean, there's the unconstitutional Pennsylvania law.
Yeah.
So it's not going away. So Republicans have to play on that playing field. Yeah. That's, I guess, what I'm asking about is Republicans have to do better about playing on that playing field, don't they?
They do. And here's another thought. So I call them not on my watch Republicans. The Republican executive establishment of Georgia is a perfect example of not on my watch Republicans. There's no fraud here. We've just seen it in Arizona. Yeah. There's no fraud here. Not on my watch. No. Does not happen on my watch. And to which I've said to a number of them, you realize that you're at risk for election integrity fraud more than anybody else, like the other team, right? But they don't want to do anything on their watch. I understand they're focused. So, Andrew, the short answer to your question is it's going to happen in the local precincts and the local Republican committees. They are the ones that need to engage with us or with themselves on election integrity. So, example, I love this example. So I live in Florida, but still attend a church in Leesburg, Virginia called Cornerstone Chapel. In Virginia, there's open ballot harvesting. Anybody can do it. You can take 5,000 ballots from 5,000 people you don't know and bring them to the box. So our pastor says, we're against this, but it's the law, so we're going to use it. So Pastor Gary set up tables in the atrium. You could register to vote. You could bring your ballot back. We'll drop them off in the ballot box for you. So that's kind of an example of places where we have bad laws that Republicans need to figure out a way either to harden the laws legislatively and be very actively doing that, make sure they have as many poll observers as humanly possible, because at the end of the day, it's the party that has to certify them, and become engaged in the grassroots. And whatever the nationals do, that's great. That's like a bonus, but let's not sit around and wait for them to do anything, right? That's kind of my
and that's important.
Thinking.
I love it. No, yeah, absolutely right. It's the adage. I'm gonna quote David Mamet here. You're either part of the solution, you're part of the problem, or you're part of the landscape.
Yeah,
And
that's exactly
and
right.
that's exactly it. Let's shift gears a little bit here, and let's talk about the other hat you wear, which is you've formed this center right coalition down on the Gulf Coast of southern Florida, which is where you're living, as opposed to where I used to live, which was the Gulf Coast up in the Panhandle. Talk about, and this is why you're out in Jackson Hole as we're talking here. Jackson Hole, by the way, Kerri, if you're not aware of this, this is where the Siberia scenes were filmed in the movie Rocky IV.
I did not know that, but I'm not shocked that you do.
Yes. You see, if you go and look at the mountains, you say, okay, this is Siberia from Rocky IV. So talk about the network of these center-right meetings and why they're so vital.
They're wonderful. So many people may or may not know that Grover Norquist of Americans for Tax Reform started a center-right meeting in D.C. about, I think it's like 33 years ago. And Andrew and I are there a lot. I wish I were there more, but kind of an air flight for me. But they have about 150 people in the room, a lot of Hill staffers, think tankers, interested parties, business people, all kinds of conservatives come together. So about 20 years ago, Grover said, oh my goodness, you know what? We need to do this in the States. So right now, I believe there are roughly 50-ish center-right coalition meetings in various states. In Florida, we have 4. So I'm in Naples and Fort Myers, which is Collier and Lee County. We have one in Tallahassee, one in Orlando, and one in Miami. They all have a different flavor. They all have a different component. The one in Florida, in Tallahassee, is very legislative-centric. Mine down in Naples is all activists. We have an amazing activist community. So it's basically everybody comes in. You have attendees, and then you have presenters. Our presenters do about 3 or 4 minutes. They come from every aspect of the conservative movement, and they're people who are working on similar things and never met each other before. So I could list, because it would be boring, but I could list probably 10 off the top of my head of groups and individuals that have come to my meeting, or our meeting. I shouldn't say my meeting. I always tell people it's your meeting,
sure.
my meeting.
Of course.
Who now are working together on various issues and supporting each other because they came to the meeting and found out, oh, that guy's working on that too. I had no idea. So it's a wonderful opportunity to push conservative community in conservative communities, and they have been remarkably successful. It's just wonderful. It's just a joy and it's a lot of work, but it's a joy and a pleasure to put it together.
I want to underscore what you just said. Kerri just said we want to put conservative community into conservative communities.
Yes.
And that's a brilliant way of putting it. And it's one of those things where I first came to the Wednesday meeting in D.C. because when I was living in Northwest Florida, I was invited to the Tallahassee meeting, which has been going on for more than,
long time.
Not more than 30. It's been going on for at least 25 years now, because that's when I was living in Northwest Florida, and then came to the D.C. meeting and met you. But so vital. I need to start going to the ones in Virginia once again. But my point in this is this. It was because of, I can't tell you how many times I've gone to a Wednesday meeting and heard about an issue and wanted to work on that issue.
Absolutely.
That's the beauty of it, is putting people together. The original one founded to get groups together to talk about healthcare policy and to push back against Hillary Care. So very, very vital in that regard. Listen, I normally, Kerri, I ask people, because I think I've told you this. I wanted to do at one point a podcast called Outside Interests, where we talk about, the stuff outside of politics and public policy that people are doing. On the other hand, I know that for you, you're retired, but you're not retired. You live and breathe this.
I live and breathe this.
Is there stuff? Do you have stuff outside that you and your husband do down in Florida? You swim. I know that, but what other? Do you have any other time to do other stuff outside of this, or are you so consumed?
I will be honest. It's the work-life balance is tough, and again, I complain bitterly about being tired in all the airplanes. But I wouldn't trade it for anything because it's so important. It's just so critically important. I just had my first grandbaby. As you know, Andrew, my daughter lives in Canada.
Congratulations, Mazel Tov.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm planning to do a lot of traveling. My son's an Army officer. He and his wife are in Italy, Connor.
That's right.
If you know Connor. They're coming back to the States in December. He's now a captain, and he's doing captain-y things. And so they're going to be back in the States. So, I do mission trips, so I'm going to be gone almost all of March to Africa on what used to be a yearly mission trip, but COVID kind of put that.
Yeah.
So I am determined that in 2023, I am going to be a little bit more flexible with myself. Fortunately, my boss, Cleta Mitchell, is the most wonderful person in the entire planet and completely understands family priorities and works probably harder and more hours than I do. So yeah, it's a little tough, but you know what? It's not like I go into an office and do business stuff. Like I'm not bragging, right. So don't anybody misunderstand what I'm saying. But with myself and my colleagues and people like you, Andrew, it's so important. Like we really live and breathe freedom and liberty for other people. It's so important to us that it's very hard to step away from that. It really is. It's a heavy responsibility and a joy all at the same time.
Well, Kerri, we miss you in D.C. We miss you especially because you are always traveling around doing this important work, but we are grateful that you are doing that important work. How do folks find out more about what you're up to?
You can find us on our website, which is whoscounting.us. And if anyone is not familiar, nice. Stalin famously said, "It does not matter who votes, it matters who counts the votes." So a little bit tongue-in-cheek, we came up with whoscounting.us. There is an opportunity there to sign up and get our Citizens Guide to Election Integrity, which teaches you how to start a little mini task force at your kitchen table. We have master classes in election integrity, and there's a way to contact us there. I'll also give out my email twice because I have...
Please.
The last name is horrendous. It's K...
Yes.
TOLOCZKO@cpi.org. So one more time, KTOLOCZKO@cpi.org. My job is to help people become engaged in this election integrity movement. So if you're listening and you have any interest or whatsoever, please email me. It would be a blessing for me to have that email.
Kerri Toloczko, thank you for your friendship and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Andrew. It is always a privilege. So glad to be with you.
Thank you all for tuning in for another episode of the Lunch Hour with Federal Newswire podcast. Enjoy the rest of your lunch.
This has been the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour podcast, hosted by Andrew Langer. Check out the Federal Newswire's family of websites, as well as their social media stream.